Since the adoption of a steel combat helmet in 1917, the U.S. military always tried to improve the design. In the 1950s, they made a conscious effort to look at material other than steel. That resulted in the 1980s PASGT, the Personal Armor System Ground Troops helmet. Even before the end of World War II, the U.S. military started working on ways to improve the combat helmet. In the 50s, several interesting designs were attempted, including this tropical-style helmet, which looks similar to the Liberty Bell experimental model of World War I. A post-World War II study titled Military Helmet Design, compiled at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, made the following recommendations regarding a new combat helmet. First, the one-size-fits-all M1 helmet should be replaced with a helmet available in 3 sizes. Secondly, the helmet should provide protection against radiation, heat, wind, and cold. Finally, ballistic materials other than steel should be considered. Between 1948 and 1955, the military conducted experiments with the X generation of helmets. The X49, X50, X51, X52, and X53. Like the experimental helmets of World War I, the X helmets were designed at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The common denominator for these helmets was that the shells were all made from aluminum and the liners nylon. They were deeper and far lighter than the steel M1 helmet and its liner. It was hoped the lightweight X helmets could fill the role for a variety of combat forces: infantry, tank crews, air crews, and airborne. In airborne tests, however, every parachutist lost his helmet during a jump due to the poorly designed, oversized T1 type chin strap clip. The helmet was far from ballistic with its aluminum shell, and while it was made in several sizes with various test configurations, none of the X helmets were adopted. There were also attempts to maintain the basic shape of the M1 helmet, but to use different materials. In the late 1960s, several M1 style helmets were produced from titanium. These helmets had no rim, as the steel M1 helmets did, and were slightly lighter. In a head-to-head test with steel helmets, the titanium helmets proved to be far stronger than their steel counterparts. Several liner versions were tested, including a Wilson-Davis-designed suspension that relied on leather, plastic, and Velcro. Another version of the titanium M1 style helmet had the suspension secured directly inside the titanium shell. This resulted in a smaller profile and a lighter helmet. Approximately 1,000 titanium helmets plus an unknown amount of M1 helmets made completely from nylon were produced, but none apparently entered active service. Managing the testing of various types of materials for the new helmet program, now called the Personal Armor System Ground Troop, or PASGT, sometimes called the PASKET, fell to project officers Larry McManus and Phil Durand, who worked at Natick. They coordinated the development and testing of new helmets constructed of ballistic materials and Kevlar. Several early prototypes of the PASGT helmet were originally created with an epoxy resin. The camouflage design was printed directly onto the helmet. Unlike the M1 helmet, there was no liner for the PASGT. While it retained the same basic Riddell-style suspension, it was riveted directly to the protective shell. Another material tested was a type of fiberglass reinforced with plastic called GRP. The fiberglass provided the ballistic protection, while the plastic helped the helmet maintain its shape. Interestingly, one of the project managers was asked about the camouflage pattern, and he replied that it was primarily a marketing gimmick to make the helmet more attractive to the military. This prototype PASGT is equipped with a Vietnam-era reversible cover. What's interesting about this helmet is the suspension, which could be removed. The liner was cradled in a protective rubber edge that fit over the flare of the helmet. There were no screws needed to hold the system in place. The style of liner was experimental only and was not produced for combat forces. This was the basic PASGT when all testing and development was completed. Scientists and developers determined this was a very optimal design for functionality and safety. How ironic is it that similar designs created by Bashford Dean's team in 1918, such as the Model 2 and Model 5, were declined, only to have a very similar design adopted some 60 years later. Early in the PASGT program, it was determined that the helmet would be used with a camouflage cover. This is an example of a very early experimental cover for the PASGT. It was ultimately declined and the standard pattern became woodland camouflage. An interesting and rarely seen PASGT cover is that of the Multinational Force and Observers. Since 1982, an independent, non-UN peacekeeping force composed of approximately 550 U.S. soldiers, plus soldiers from other nations, are stationed in the Sinai to verify, observe, and report on the status of peace between Egypt and Israel. They wear the bright orange helmet cover to identify themselves as observers. When the PASGT was finally issued to combat forces in the early 1980s, the helmet weighed in at approximately 3 pounds. The suspension remained very similar to that used in the World War II liner. Initially, the U.S. military ordered 1 million helmets at a cost of $97 per helmet. They first saw action in the U.S. invasion of Grenada. As tensions grew in the Middle East in the late 1980s, the U.S. military geared up for possible action in the region. This resulted in the desert camouflage designs. Early desert PASGT covers consisted of a 6-color chocolate chip pattern. These were eventually replaced by a 3-color pattern as worn on the helmet you see here. Incidentally, this helmet is also equipped with a mount for night vision goggles. Both styles of helmet cover saw action in Operation Desert Storm. Recently, the U.S. Marine Corps adopted a new camouflage pattern called MARPAT, or Marine Pattern. This is a cutting-edge digital design which enhances camouflage and makes it even more difficult to see a Marine even if an adversary is using night vision devices. The helmet covers are reversible with a green pattern and a desert pattern. Printed right into the pattern of the camouflage is the Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor insignia. Variations of the digital camo are being adopted by the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. In addition to improved digital camouflage, the U.S. Marine Corps has worked to develop a lightweight Marine Corps version of the PASGT. While it appears to be an identical copy of the original helmet, it actually weighs approximately 7 ounces less. There are also upgrade kits to improve the suspension system. In the early 21st century, the U.S. military unveiled its newest combat helmet, the MISH, or Modular Integrated Communications Helmet, that provides ballistic and impact protection. The helmet can be used with the newest night vision equipment, nuclear, biological, and chemical gear, communication packages, and body armor. The name MISH implied the helmet came with communications gear, but that gear was destined to be used by Special Operations Force and Delta operators. The Army opted to rename the helmet the ACH, or Advanced Combat Helmet. The helmet was designed to provide a soldier maximum sensory ability, both sight and sound. The helmet weighs in at just over 3 pounds. The ACH featured a completely different suspension than the PASGT. It relies on pads held in place with Velcro. They can be moved and configured for each soldier's individual comfort. They provide exceptional balance, support, and stability. The ACH has seen its first combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan during America's War on Terror. The helmet has been very successful. Military personnel who have used the helmet in the theater of operations reported it's a very comfortable helmet to wear. While it still weighs about as much as the older PASGT, the improved suspension disperses the weight better. One criticism is that the chin strap design does interfere to a certain extent with peripheral vision if the helmet isn't adjusted correctly. Since 1917, the combat helmet has been an essential piece of equipment for all members of the U.S. Armed Forces. Evolving from a borrowed British design in World War I, innovators like Bashford Dean, Harold Sydenham, John and Jack Riddell, Phil Durand, and Lawrence McManus elevated the design and protective qualities of the American combat helmet over the course of the 20th century. Through their efforts and the efforts of untold individuals and companies working closely with the U.S. military, the professional men and women serving in America's military have, since World War II, been equipped with the standard by which all combat helmets are measured.